All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome and good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us virtually today. My name is Hialeah Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am very pleased to welcome you to today's event, Writing from Personal Experiences, where we will hear both fiction and nonfiction. Dawn Marinelli will be reading from Running at Hialeah, released July 4th, 2022, and Nicholas A. Daniels will be reading from Outbreaks and Pandemics, The Life of a Disease Detective, a memoir, released December 15th, 2022. Both authors' books can be purchased both from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, the books can be ordered from Atmosphere Press's website at atmospherepress.com/books. And then I'll drop some links for you in the chat. At the end of today's event, we will have time for your questions. So during the readings, if you think of a question for one or both of our authors, go ahead and type it in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. And then during the actual reading itself, please be sure to stay muted just to keep extraneous sound at a minimum. Of course, you can always feel free to use the chat for any praise and comments. And one last note, we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. If you have a book manuscript of your own, we would love to read it, so submit your work today to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and supporting Dawn and Nicholas today. We'll start off with our first reader, who is Dawn Marinelli. Dawn, like the protagonist of this novel, is an Italian-American born and bred in Brooklyn, New York, who, like Bernie, experienced in his youth a sudden, unexpected, and traumatic relocation to Hialeah, Florida. The comparisons end there. Marinelli has been an educator and university professor for over 40 years. He has taught at Carnegie Mellon, Arizona State University, Columbia University, and various other colleges and universities. He is co-founder of the renowned Carnegie Mellon University Entertainment Technology Center, one of the first true right brain, left brain initiatives in higher education. Now he lives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In the novel Running at Hialeah, Bernie journeys to redeem his past in South Florida. Determined to reclaim his family home and deposit his father's cremains at the finish line of Hialeah Racetrack, he takes us on a voyage of redemption that is sure to keep readers both laughing and crying. Dawn, take it away.
Thank you very much. So here is Running at Hialeah. Yolanda Ruiz sat at her cluttered cubicle in the Hialeah branch office of the small but aspiring South Florida real estate company, the Mendoza Agency. She was busy contemplating her nails, her failed marriage, and the 2001 economic downturn that began in March and was projected to last through the end of the year. The prospect of adding to the climbing unemployment rate spurred on her work, especially in a commission-based industry like real estate. Inside the fluorescent-lit office, it was a beautiful day, a perfect 72 degrees. Not a trace of humidity stood a chance against the industrial-strength air conditioning unit located on the roof. Outside, in the real world, it was a sweltering 99 degrees. Hot enough inside Yolanda's beloved Camaro to bake the Pillsbury dinner roll she had forgotten to take into her apartment the night before. The Latin music blazing from the Sony boombox she bought from an appliance recycler at the Tropical Park flea market had Yolanda dancing around the office like a human maraca. She thought briefly about going through the stack of papers on her desk, real estate transactions in various stages of negotiations, but a WQBA Gloria Estefan Oldies triple treat put that idea on hold. Gloria's suggestion that we all do the conga seemed like a very good idea, especially right before lunch. In fact, Yolanda had much to contemplate. This seeming slice of heaven came at a price, namely her marriage to a very handsome, distinguished, but decidedly old-fashioned Cuban gentleman who didn't think women should work, a belief he held most assuredly for wife and mistresses alike. And there were at least 3 of the latter by Yolanda's last count. Despite her now husband's lofty moral stance regarding each gender's proper societal roles, Yolanda was determined to work because she figured out that work was the only promise of freedom in her hitherto regimented and, truth be known, downright boring life. She remembered an elderly German client who she thought resembled Colonel Klink from Hogan's Heroes. He once extolled the virtues of a famous Teutonic expression, Arbeit macht frei, work make one's free, a saying that struck a resonant chord in her. She surely couldn't argue with such wisdom. She liked the saying so much that she wrote it with a Sharpie fine point black marker on the side of her well-worn Apple computer, the one that had survived the prognosticated Y2K apocalypse of just last year. She wondered periodically why some clients, especially New Yorkers, took affront at such a commendable slogan. What indeed had happened to the vaunted American work ethic? She also wondered whether monocles might ever return as an haute couture fashion statement. Julio Iglesias had replaced Gloria Estefan on the radio, transporting Yolanda into a pensive, contemplative state of mind. It would have made Julio proud. She pondered the papers on her desk. None of it looked appealing, but if she wanted to remain free, a euphemism for employed, she reasoned she had better get to work. Now, she had no sooner randomly selected the lucky document that would constitute work for the next half hour when the front door to the office on Hialeah's East 25th Street, also known as 79th Street in Miami, swung open. A stiff blast of hot, humid Saturday afternoon air blew into the office like a shock wave of a thermonuclear device. The heat concussion removed all sense of initiative, but sparked her interest. What nut would be walking outside in weather like this, she wondered. Couldn't be a native, no way. People didn't move to South Florida to be in the sun. They moved to South Florida to sit in air conditioning and avoid the sun. As with jungles, swamps, and rainforests, they were glad the gorgeous hot weather existed, but preferred confinement indoors at Dayton Mall or Walmart over risking exposure to the deadly rays of the melanoma machine. When the blinding sunshine was eclipsed by the closing door and her vision returned to normal, Yolanda was startled to find a man standing in front of her desk. At first, she could only make out his silhouette, a dark human form surrounded by light, who slowly began to take shape. He wasn't young, he wasn't old. He stood 5'11", according to the robbery yardstick by the front door, the height of her ex-husband, and wore a blue guayabera shirt, amply stained with perspiration, over white linen trousers. She spied a pack of cigarettes in his shirt pocket. The straw hat on his head coordinated with his beige suede loafers, but she couldn't tell whether that was the intention or pure dumb luck. At first glance, he projected a fashionable South Florida persona, but of the bargain basement variety. This man did not shop at Cocoa Walk in the Grove. He had longish hair and a salt and pepper mustache. He also had a salt and pepper expression on his face. He glanced around the office, looking somewhat perplexed. This triggered in Yolanda a cascade of possible reasons. Maybe he was curious as to why she was the only person in the office. Maybe he was simply lost. Maybe he was a lunatic contemplating rape and murder. Or in the best possible case, maybe he was a simple, pleasant, prospective home buyer. In Yolanda, South Florida, the answer could have been D, all of the above. Whatever the case, it wasn't time to reach for the snub-nosed .38 revolver Yolanda kept in the top drawer of her desk. Mustn't shoot the customers without provocation, she reminded herself. The pregnant pause popped when Yolanda chirped, "Hola," to which the stranger responded with what sounded like hula. Yolanda nodded, thinking, nice try, then continued, "May I help you?" "Yeah, sure. I'd like to speak to a real estate agent," the man asked in a quiet but husky voice. "Why, yes, of course, you've come to the right place," Yolanda answered excitedly. She smiled broadly, sensing at once the inquiry of someone searching. Let us not forget, she reminded herself, real estate is a commission enterprise. In other words, the more you sell, the more you make. It was a profession similar to Yolanda Ruiz is my name, certified real estate agent. Please sit down. She motioned to the chair directly across from her. My secretary and her policeman boyfriend had to run an errand, but I'm expecting them back any moment. She figured no reason to take any chances. You are a real estate agent? The man inquired, seemingly surprised, putting way too much emphasis on the personal pronoun, enough for Yolanda to suppress a smirk. Yes, I am. In fact, one of the best you can find anywhere in Hialeah, she assured him, a glittering smile marking her face. The man nodded and sat down. He didn't remove his straw hat. He also didn't say anything for the longest time. Ice was developing here, and Yolanda had the sneaking suspicion that she, alas, was going to be the one to break it. I've been with the Mendoza agency for 6 years, she boasted proudly, a top earner. Hialeah is my specialty. Born and raised here, in fact. I know this town like the back of my hand. She showed him the back of her hand. So let me ask, are you interested in a commercial property or a domestic dwelling? Even she was surprised by the sudden officiousness of her language, but she tried to hide her eagerness and anxiety behind the gleaming, beaming smile that had carried her through many an awkward situation in the past. All Bernie heard was that accent. It was an accent that conjured up so many disturbing memories from his youth. There was no gentler way of describing his feelings. It was the accent of foreigners in a land that he too had found foreign. The difference was that they were truly foreigners, and he was from New York City, Brooklyn to be specific. Not fair. How could they seem more at home than he could? The answer, he realized, had been beyond the grasp of youth. Fortunately, that was then, long ago, in the past, a part of the past he had absolutely no desire to relive ever, a past in need of reconciliation. Now he found the accent pleasant, reassuring, even beckoning, like it belonged, sexy even. But it raised again all the emotions that had led him to return to a city he had abandoned almost 25 years before, vowing then never to return. Yet here he was, back in Hialeah, another broken vow added to the pile. Yolanda stood up and extended her perfectly manicured, ring-bedecked hand to the stranger. And what is your name, sir? Sir, he pondered. But it made sense. 55 years of age is definitely sir material, as much as he might hate to admit it. My name is Buccellato, Barney Buccellato. He still held Yolanda's hand. It's a house that I'm interested in, he added almost as an afterthought. Excellent, Yolanda replied, exuding genuine excitement. Granted, commercial property was the real commission earner, but here in Hialeah, it was a long shot. She conceded silently, who in their right mind wanted to relocate a business into high-crime Hialeah? So you're looking for a house, Yolanda repeated, nodding approvingly. Oh, there are so many beautiful houses here in Hialeah. It's a perfect place to raise a family, she added, not really noting the man's age. I don't have a family, he replied, then checking himself, well, I do, but that's not why I want a house. He thought again. Then again, maybe it is why, he chuckled to himself. Yolanda realized it was time to end that line of questioning. No matter. We have houses for every taste here in Hialeah. So tell me, do you want to sell or buy? Buy, Bernie said, as if it was obvious. I want to buy a house. He paused for no apparent reason, then said again, there's a house I am interested in buying. Yolanda couldn't believe her lucky stars. This was shaping up as a walk-in sale. A walk-in sale in this day and age? A veritable blessing, manna from heaven? Well, I'm sure we can help you, she said excitedly. Now, tell me about this property you had in mind. Where is it in Hialeah? Not far from here, Bernie said. The address is 859 East 21st Street. A one-story single-family dwelling, as you say in the business. He was proud of his newfound command of real estate lingo. Oh, yes, a very nice neighborhood, Yolanda responded, immediately asking Divine forgiveness for the outright lie. She ran the address through her mental Rolodex. I am not familiar with that particular property, though I know the area very well. A fine residential community, relaxed, A fine place for raising a family, if you had a family, but also quiet and relaxing too. She expressly omitted the Florida East Coast Railroad mainline tracks that ran right behind the street, usually pulling trains of over 100 cars at all hours of the day and night. Muy bien, let's see, 859 East 21st Street. She quickly scanned the listings. Pages flipped forward and backward. Her facial expression ran the gamut of excited to semi-flustered. A furrowed brow marked a frustrated cessation of the search. I don't think it was listed originally with Mendoza Realty, but that's all right because I'm sure it's on the multi-list directory. Do you recall what kind of real estate sign is in front of the house? Bernie shrugged his shoulders, shook his head, and blinked rapidly. What kind of sign? Not very observant, Yolanda thought, giving him a demerit, hoping he could make up for it in the bonus round. Okay, let me ask you this. Do you remember what color the sign was? That might help. Mendoza Realty is orange with aqua lettering, just like the Miami Dolphins. Ortiz Realty is that real nice blue-green the Marlins wear. Phillips Realty is black and yellow. Keene's Realty is white with green lettering. Kind of boring, really. I'm sure you'd know if it was that Century 21. They have that putrid mustard color. Can you imagine wearing a jacket that color? They make their agents wear those ugly jackets. I had a friend once. Bernie took in these real estate fun facts with a steady nod of the head. Though if truth be known, every syllable went in one ear and out the other. Yolanda had stopped talking, but Bernie kept on nodding. She quickly concluded he had no idea what color sign was in front of the house, nor was he as color conscious as she would have liked. Okay, well, no problem, Mr. Bucciolato. We have access to all properties on the market. If you just give me a few minutes, I'll look it up for you. Take your time, Bernie called out. Yolanda rose and crossed to the microfiche machine containing listings of all homes for sale in Dade County. It gave Bernie a chance to look her over, size her up. He had a definite weakness for stretch pants, especially the stirrup kind, but fought the urge to stare or be obvious. New life, he reminded himself. Mr. Bucciolato, there seems to be a little problem, Yolanda stuttered, figuring the best defense was a good offense. I've checked every multi-listing we have, and I'm sorry to report I see nothing listed for 859 East 21st Street. She tried a disarming giggle that didn't seem to elicit any response whatsoever. Still, no cause to be concerned, she continued. I'm thinking it may have just come on the market, in which case, Bernie took a hefty final puff of the lit cigarette as he pulled out another cigarette from his shirt pocket. Lighting it up, he exhaled a question. I'm sorry, but what is it you're looking for, Miss Ruiz? He seemed genuinely puzzled. Taken aback, Yolanda smiled awkwardly. The listing for the house you said you were interested in buying. Remember? Yolanda wondered if perhaps she wasn't the one who had everything confused. He didn't seem disturbed in the least, whereas she was ready for a Valium. Bernie leaned forward slowly until he was practically halfway across Yolanda's desk. He looked directly into her big, soft brown eyes. He saw the mascara on her eyelashes, her eyeshadow, eyebrow liner, impressed by the precision of their application. He liked her bright red lipstick and saw how it matched the rouge on her cheeks. She was an attractive woman, he realized. He wondered why she was trembling. Miss Ruiz, he said calmly yet firmly, I am very interested in 859 East 21st Street. Very interested, more than you can imagine. And I want you to help me buy it. Yolanda felt relieved. This wasn't a bad dream, and she wasn't crazy, at least not completely. She opened her mouth in reply, but could only muster a squeak. Was she actually this nervous? She cleared her throat and tried again, not much better, but at least she was audible. Mr. Bucciolato, please believe me when I say that I want nothing more than to help you buy that house. That's my job. But even though I've looked everywhere possible, I simply cannot find the listing for that house anywhere. Uh-oh, she felt a tear forming. Bernie nodded knowingly. Made sense to him. Well, maybe that's because the house in question isn't for sale, he said matter-of-factly. Yolanda asked Bernie to repeat what he had just said. I said maybe that's because the house in question isn't for sale. Slowly, ever so slowly, Yolanda broke out into an exhausted grin. Yes, yes, Mr. Buccellato, that could definitely be why. Both eased back into their respective chairs, a look of contentment on each other's faces. After all, the mystery had just been solved. Ridiculous and slightly absurd, but solved nevertheless. Yolanda's relieved expression conveyed, okay, now what? Bernie puffed away on his cigarette, crushing it finally into an empty coffee cup. He stretched, sniffed surreptitiously at his underarms, combed his hand through his hair, and fanned himself with his Panama hat. So, shall we go? He asked abruptly, literally jumping up from his chair. Go? Go where? A bewildered Yolanda replied. To see the house, he affirmed, pondering whether this woman really was a top-notch real estate agent. She seemed at times to be rather dense and bewildered. How much clearer did he need to be, he wondered. Mr. Buccellato, I want to make sure I understand exactly what is going on here, she professed. You want to buy a house that is not for sale. Is that correct? Bernie thought for a moment and answered, well, yeah, I guess you could put it that way. Okay, good. At least I know I'm not crazy, she sighed. Crazy? Bernie repeated. Honey, that line forms behind me, was his taut response. Yolanda had no time to reply, for Bernie was standing by the front door, pointing frantically at his watch. Come on, Miss Ruiz, hurry up. Let's go before someone else buys it first. The end.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Don. That reading was just so animated. I felt like I was right there as this conversation was playing out in front of me. That's great. Thank you. Reading next today is going to be Nicholas A. Daniels. Nicholas is a foodborne disease expert specializing in the prevention of foodborne diseases. Dr. Daniels has a Bachelor of Arts in Biochemistry from Cornell University, a Master of Public Health from Yale University, and a Doctor of Medicine from the University of Washington, Seattle. Dr. Daniels completed his residency in the Department of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and is board certified in internal medicine. He held a fellowship at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the Division of Foodborne, Waterborne, and Environmental Diseases, National Center for Infectious Diseases, and has served as a medical disease detective and consultant for the World Health Organization in Southeast Asia. He was a professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and San Diego. He currently is a senior associate consultant and associate professor of medicine at Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona. Outbreaks and Pandemics, The Life of a Disease Detective is the memoir of Dr. Daniels and how he overcame seemingly insurmountable odds to attain professional success. Through his journey from poverty to the Ivy League to becoming an infectious disease epidemiologist, he chronicles an American dream come true. Let's hear more now from Nicholas.
I'll show you a cover of the book, Outbreaks and Pandemics. So I'm going to read an excerpt from cholera epidemic in West Africa. In October 1997, Guinea-Bissau's Ministry of Health asked the CDC for help in combating a continuing cholera epidemic. In the previous year, there had been over 25,000 cases of cholera and nearly 1,000 associated deaths. In the capital of Bissau alone, over 18,000 cases had been reported and 225 deaths. Oral rehydration solution, ORS centers, had been established to counter the outbreak, but the mortality rate remained unacceptably high. Accordingly, Dr. Eric Mentz approached me one morning and asked if I would be interested in going to Guinea-Bissau in West Africa to assess the epidemic and implement an intervention aimed at reducing infections and saving lives. After private lessons in basic Portuguese, a laboratory expert and I set off for Guinea-Bissau. Amabilia Rodriguez, the Minister of Health in the government of Guinea-Bissau, met us on arrival. Our first day, we toured the cholera ward of Simon Mendes National Hospital, which was at maximum capacity. Since they were too weak to walk, sick people were carried into the hospital by relatives for urgent hydration and emergency medical care. There were hundreds of patients lying on thin floor mats or small beds with pads, which looked like the remnants of a hospital ward from World War I. It was certainly going to be a battle to win this fight against cholera. Patients were of all ages, extremely gaunt, emaciated, with sunken eyes, dry skin, prominent cheekbones, listlessness. Everyone was receiving intravenous fluids and oral rehydration solution. Cholera has the ability to profoundly dehydrate a person through voluminous loss of fluid and electrolytes. Cholera can cause vascular and blood pressure collapse, shock, coma, and death within 24 to 48 hours of illness onset. It is literally a battle against time. More fluid and electrolytes must be infused or taken orally than are being lost through diarrhea and vomiting. The rice water-like diarrhea caused by cholera can typically induce about 1 to 2 liters loss of fluids every hour. The hospital ward was understaffed and patients had to retrieve their own oral rehydration solution from bucket stations throughout the ward, using old containers cut in half, which had been used for dispensing intravenous fluids. We quickly learned that many of the sick had attended a rural funeral wherein family and friends washed the bodies of bodies of dead cholera victims and subsequently ate food with their hands without sanitizing them first. National health authorities were just starting to ban these traditional funeral practices as they believed that these rituals were perpetuating the current epidemic. It was evident that the funeral participants often became the next wave of cholera victims. Moreover, we started to see patients die after seeking care too late, and we observed that many patients did not clinically improve even after weeks of hospitalization and despite receiving adequate amounts of oral rehydration solution, which had been touted as one of the greatest medical discoveries of the 20th century. Vibrio cholera, again, can cause profuse watery diarrhea by producing a toxin that causes the cells in the intestine to secrete water and electrolytes from the small bowel, leading to massive fluid losses and profound dehydration. Throughout history, cholera has been one of the most serious illnesses on the planet, often proving fatal. In line with my emergency department intensive care unit training in Seattle and San Francisco, I donned gloves, a gown for contact precautions, and began starting intravenous lines for critically ill patients who were obtunded or comatose, signs of impending death. I had never seen a case of cholera during my medical training in the United States, and nothing in my medical training had prepared me for the intense experience of thousands of patients dying of cholera, with many in need of critical and intensive care in a healthcare system with limited resources. After witnessing the despair and deaths in the cholera ward, I experienced an episode of post-traumatic stress disorder. I began to fear for my life and question my career decisions. A common visceral response that healthcare workers have on the front lines during deadly epidemic and pandemics. Why did I come to Africa? Why didn't I receive the partially effective cholera vaccination from Canada, not yet approved in the United States? before traveling to Guinea-Bissau? Would I become infected or possibly die from this deadly strain of Vibrio cholera? After reflecting on the seemingly dire situation in Guinea-Bissau, I called Dr. Eric Mintz at CDC and told him that this outbreak was out of control and that I thought it would be impossible for us to make a real difference or implement an intervention that would reduce the mortality rate. I requested that the U.S. Embassy in Guinea-Bissau and the CDC remove us immediately from this hot zone until our health and personal safety could be assured in this war-torn country, politically unstable from repeated coups and attempted coups, and with little or no infrastructure. We lived in a luxury hotel by African standards and had a driver who would take us from the cholera ward to our laboratory and back to our hotel. The city was too unsafe for us to be unaccompanied or to walk around the city. We ate only at the hotel where the food was brought in from Portugal because the safety of the local food and water could not be assured. CDC headquarters declined my request for immediate evacuation. Instead, I was told to implement an intervention program in the cholera ward. After observing patients and nurses dipping cups and germ-laden hands into oral rehydration containers, which had been prepared with untreated municipal tap water, I took samples of oral rehydration fluid to our laboratory for analysis and microbiologic culturing. To my surprise, we found E. coli, Vibrio cholera 01, and Salmonella typhi in the cholera ward ORS samples examined. It was now clear to me why so many patients in the cholera ward were not getting better despite adequate treatment regimens. They were becoming infected with other coliform bacteria. The supposed life-saving ORS solution was making the patients sicker because it was contaminated with other bacteria. After this revelation, we introduced to the ward several 20-liter closed, narrow-mouth ORS storage vessels with spigots, thus preventing the dipping of hands or cups inside the solution. We cleaned the vessels daily with commercial bleach and used a few drops of bleach to disinfect the tap water used to make the ORS. We retested the ORS and found no coliforms. Soon, we noticed that the mortality rates dropped and hospital length of stays declined for patients. Our inexpensive intervention had made an enormous difference simply by providing a safer way to provide ORS in a hospital setting. Before our departure, we shared our safe preparation methodology and donated additional vessels sent from the United States in collaboration with the Procter & Gamble Company to cholera treatment centers throughout Guinea-Bissau. While working in Guinea-Bissau, I encountered several local African people who told me that they knew exactly where my African ancestors originated based on my facial features. They said that my African ancestral tribes originated from the Guinea-Conakry area, just south of Bissau in West Central Africa. After being in Africa for the first time, was spiritual and transformational for me, just from learning where my African ancestors were originally from before being exploited, sold, and placed on slave ships destined for North America. I already knew of my Native American and European Welsh roots from my grandparents. However, my African roots were unknown. Unlike other countries, other cultures in America, most African Americans are not aware of their ancestral villages or countries of origin. In collaboration with the U.S. Embassy and the U.S. Agency for International Development and the Peace Corps, I was invited to give several lectures to young, gifted African students about cholera prevention, which were all well received. Several students even wrote back thank you letters to me, The Peace Corps instructors wrote and said that many of the students in the class wanted to say goodbye before my departure, but that the students were reportedly apprehensive about going into the ritzy hotel where I was staying out of fear that they wouldn't be allowed past the front door. Ultimately, the students decided not to come. At the airport, as we were leaving Guinea-Bissau, I noticed that some of the passengers on the flight were being taken behind a curtain for a money grab or an old school shakedown before they were allowed to board the flight at the final passport control point. I heard passengers crying and pleading with checkpoint officials to allow them to board their flight. Because people were so desperate to leave, they seemed willing to pay the corrupt airport officials with a bribe or pay for boarding the flight unofficial mandate. After putting on a stern face at the checkpoint, which clearly conveyed not to mess with me, I was allowed to board the flight without going behind the curtain for an extortion attempt. I think that's it. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. I just want to say the way that you sort of weave between these different themes, even in just that one excerpt, I mean, it really shows, the depth this memoir gets into. So thank you for that. At this point, we do have about 15-20 minutes for our audience Q&A. So if you have a question, please go ahead and type it in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. I've already received a couple of questions. So the first question for both of you is, when did you know that what you had experienced in your lives, whether it was for this memoir or, inspiring your novel, Dawn, when did you know that those were experiences you wanted to write about? And when did those books sort of first come to be? Maybe, Nicholas, if you could start us off.
So I think it first started for me was at the beginning of COVID, because I had more time and I started to reflect on my life and the fact that I had lived through several pandemics and epidemics and outbreaks. I practiced medicine during the HIV/AIDS pandemic and now during the COVID pandemic. And then all of my international and national outbreak investigations. I felt like I wanted to pull this all together and to see if I could try to educate. Again, I wanted to write a book for a general audience as opposed to scientists and other doctors that I've written for traditionally throughout my career. But I wanted to reach an average person to educate them about food safety, the importance of disease detectives, and how and what we should do to help prepare for the next pandemic.
Yeah, I think a lot of writers kind of right around that time also sort of started feeling that inspiration, but this is even more, directly tied to that. So it totally makes a lot of sense. Dawn, what about you? When did you know that your life experiences, it was time to make a book out of it?
Well, this particular story, I knew I had to write as far back as 1983, because 1983 is when my father died. And indeed, his last wish was to have his ashes strewn at the finish line of Hialeah racetrack. And we did not do that. We did not do that because it would be embarrassing. Okay, it would be embarrassing to us. So instead, the old man ended up in the water off of 79th Street beach in Miami, on Miami Beach. But I knew I had to deal with this. I mean, and if anything, the COVID shutdown gave me the time to do so.
Yeah, again, coming to that, now we've got all this time and what are we going to make out of that? For sure. Another question has come in. This is another one for both of you. What was the hardest part of writing your books? I know this is kind of a big question, but maybe Dawn, if you'd want to start us off with this one.
The hardest part of writing the book was really figuring out what was the nature of the resolution. Okay, what was the nature of the resolution? Why would Bernie slash Don go home, go back to Hialeah, buy this house, and for what purpose? I mean, throughout the book, it's about an exorcism, um, but it's really very much about what is the resolution. And the resolution was basically that there was nothing more that could have been done back then. Okay, that you can't turn back the clock. You really can't turn back the clock. So if anything, you've got to come to the realization that um, it sounds like a bad athlete interview. It is what it is. All right. And so if anything, it's like, okay, we've been there, we've done that, we went that extra mile, and what we've come up with is, okay, what about tomorrow? Let's focus on tomorrow. So it really was trying to figure out, why would the protagonist do that? And what would the protagonist hope to get out of that? And it ends up being a resolution, not just about that, but about so many other aspects of his life, as you will encounter in the book.
Yes, definitely. Everyone needs to check out the book in its entirety to read about this. But I totally agree. It's something about, I don't know, people, I think a lot of writers it's either, beginnings or endings is their biggest challenge. And I'm definitely an endings, resolution, conclusion person. I struggle with them a lot. So I relate to that a lot. Nicholas, what about you? What was the hardest part of writing your memoir?
I think the hardest part for me was reflecting back on my life. My childhood, growing up in a extremely poor, resource limited, racially segregated, violent neighborhood in Buffalo, New York, and escaping from that environment. So that was painful. Also, reflecting on the friends that I have lost through violence, suicide, prison, so many bad outcomes for people that I grew up with. Then I think it was coming up with seeing or reflecting on friends and patients that have died from the HIV/AIDS pandemic, thinking about friends that lost or colleagues that I lost during the COVID pandemic. So I think those things really hit me. People that I had relationships with that are no longer with us. So that was kind of the hardest part for me.
Yeah, memoir, it really has this way because of all the self-reflection that goes into the process before you might even start writing anything. It just, even if it's things that are totally unrelated to what you want to write about, yeah, it's quite this, it's just kind of an emotional journey. Another question, this is for both of you. Do you want to write more books? And if so, what about? Dawn, do you want to start us off with this one?
Oh, sure. I have another book in mind that is completely different from this. It's a science fiction. I mean, I've always been a big science fiction guy, but I've had this idea for a long time, and it's different than anything that's been out there. Um, and that'll be next. That'll be the next one.
A genre shift. That is very exciting.
I'm a Gemini, so I have many different faces.
I have heard that. Nicholas, what about you? Any future plans for writing or books?
I guess very similar. I've started working on my next book, and it's going to be about a fiction or science fiction about creating a virus that comes very close to, destroying mankind on Earth, taking us really to the brink, and how do we prevent from going over? So that's sort of what I'm working on currently.
Another genre shift to science fiction, something about sci-fi these days. I feel like I've heard a lot of authors actually talking about that, I think it really makes us think about the current situation when we think about the future that way. So This is a question specifically for Nicholas. Is there a high point in your career that stands out to you?
um, um,
It's a bit of a big question to throw at you without notice.
Maybe working for the World Health Organization. I was based in the Philippines, and I was sort of in charge of infectious disease surveillance for Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, the Indochina uh, region, and I really enjoyed that. And to the point where I could have spent the rest of my career living in that environment, and would have been perfectly happy. So that's probably the high point.
Yeah, definitely. And another question, this is specifically for Dawn this time. How much did you have to change, quote unquote, real life experiences to fit into a more conventional novel structure? I think this is going off of what you were saying about your book being just based on these personal experiences and going into that resolution.
Well, the fact of the matter is that everybody in that book is someone I have either known or encountered throughout my life. I mean, not just in Florida. And so, I did indeed have to condense things clearly, and but it's pretty much a pseudo autobiography, or it's like a fictional autobiography. And I mean, if anything, it's because I knew these people so well that I really wanted to do a good job of representing them. And of course, I know a lot of people who are nuts, I mean, who are, definitely unique individuals. And Miami was filled with them, because I grew up there in the 60s, when it was, wild and crazy and what have you. But for people who read the book, a lot of the things that seem absurd happened. Okay, they happened. All right, so it's not just Don going off on some fantasy or extreme rumination. A lot of it is absolutely true. Uh, some of the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but overall, it's a lot of truth.
Yeah, I think that kind of surprises people, but often, I mean, truth really is stranger than fiction. So even in like completely fictional tales, the most outlandish events, I think, tend to be based on real events because, how do you even come up with some of these things sometimes? But a lot to look forward to in that. I have noticed a lull in the questions coming in, so I'll give a last call for any questions from anyone in the audience. But in the meantime, I do have a question for both of you. This is just one I love to hear about. Do you have any advice for young writers who maybe haven't written their first full-length book or want to, or just getting into writing? Any sort of advice for them? Dawn, if you have anything to kick us off.
Do not be afraid of rewriting. Okay, there isn't a single word on your page that is that precious. And take criticism to heart. Um, one funny story is when I submitted the manuscript to you, what I got back initially was, well, has this been published before? Because it's so well refined. And I'm like, well, no, but it went through the editor who was based in my house, my wife, and her honesty was incredible. It'd be like, how many times are you going to say the same thing? Um, uh, what is this like? Let's make it not that big a deal, but Wheel of Fortune. It's like, you're going to buy a vowel. I mean, how many freaking verb words are you going to use here? So sometimes you don't want to hear it, but you know what? It's usually on the mark.
Yeah, I really need to hear that myself. So I'm sure I am not the only one. But yes, definitely that's a good one that a lot of people I think can take a lot from. Nicholas, what about you? Any advice for young or up and coming writers?
I would just say, try to write a little bit every day if you can. Um, and and if you get an idea, I always have a pen and paper with me because it's amazing wherever I am, something on an airplane or, something comes to mind, and it's nice to be able to jot that down, or even at night when you're sleeping or dreaming. It's amazing how things come to you that I think you shouldn't ignore, and try to incorporate that, because I think that would be very useful. I found that to be very useful.
Yeah, sometimes it's just the smallest detail and you're thinking, is it even worth it to write it down? And you always should. It always ends up being important at some point, I feel like. So that's great. All right. Well, I just want to say, as always, I really just love hearing authors bring their books to life. It's like these books are coming to life in the voice of the people who created them. So thank you so much to both Dawn and Nicholas for being generous today with us, with your words and your thoughts in this Q&A, and of course with your time. And thank you to everyone in the audience for being here with us to celebrate these incredible authors. Don't forget also that you can order Running at Hialeah and Outbreaks and Pandemics from the links in the chat. I'll drop them in there just one more time for you. Please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com, where you can browse our new and forthcoming releases. You can sign up for our email newsletter, or you can submit a book manuscript of your own. You can always submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and let us know that you attended today's event. So we'll look forward to hearing from you, but other than that, that's it. Have a great rest of your weekend, everyone.
Thank you.